Let's welcome our first speaker, Robert Tyler, attorney and president of Advocates for Faith and Freedom. His subject is ballot harvesting gathering. So, Bob, just say next. You want me to advance the slide?
Okay, thank you, Dran. I'm Robert Tyler, and I'm a practicing attorney here in California. We have a for-profit and a non-profit firm. Our non-profit firm is Advocates for Faith and Freedom, where we do a lot of pro bono work for religious liberty. And on the for-profit side of our law firm, we have 9 attorneys. We represent pastors and churches throughout California is particularly part of our specialty. And we see it our practice as a ministry, and this is all part of it. So let me talk about the legal aspects with regard to ballot gathering, and particularly how it relates to churches. So I'm going to give you a little educational background first. First of all, before I even get to what is ballot gathering, I want to address something very briefly, and that is, first of all, as churches, a lot of pastors over the years that I've talked to have been cautious about getting involved politically. And my response is, I can't think of much in the culture today that are major issues that the Bible doesn't address, whether it be immigration, LGBT issues, transgenderism, taxes, the environment. There's so many things that the Bible talks about. There's scripture on these subjects, maybe not directly, but we obviously can use scriptures to influence ourselves. And I've heard from so many people who attend church that come back and they say, I just wish I was hearing and getting this information from my church, from my pastor. And there's surveys from George Barna, et cetera, that talk about these things. And so I just want to encourage you not to take a partisan political position, but to take a biblical position on political concerns, on all the issues, and encourage your parishioners, your congregation, to get out and vote, but mainly really to be looking at all the issues from a biblical perspective. So first, let's talk about what ballot gathering is and really why you're here. Ballot gathering, next slide please, Dran. It's a practice where you get a group of volunteers who come together, workers who will help obtain ballots from individuals who are not able to get out to the polling place, or maybe they're just individuals who don't get out to the voting place. Maybe they forget, maybe they got too busy that day, they didn't get to vote. And what happens is there are sheets, information that comes out that you can actually see who didn't vote by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, for example. And what happened in this last election, the Democrats were incredibly successful using this, because what they did is they sent individuals out and actually picked up ballots from from people at their residence or their place of business, wherever it was, where they hadn't voted yet. And they go out and they get these ballots and they gather them all up, and one individual takes the ballots and deposits them. Typically, it's done at 7:59 in the evening, just before the polls close, and it's called what is known commonly as ballot harvesting. And so this is a perfectly legal process. It's next slide, please. The big question when it first came about, and frankly, I would say in 2016 after the election, a lot of folks said, wait a minute, is that even legal? And the answer is yes. Assembly Bill 1921 legalized this ballot gathering process, and it changed the California Elections Code. And it actually followed a case that had been established actually early in the 80s, where it basically allowed individuals who are not the voter themselves to take a ballot and drop it into the ballot box. So, there's a provision for disabled people. Well, now it's basically opened up so that even if you're not disabled if you just can't get to if you just don't want to go to the ballot box yourself, you can have someone else take your ballot and vote for you. So these are people who are registered as ballot by mail or vote by mail that would have these ballots already at home, but they just simply haven't put them and followed through, filled the forms out, and taken them to the voting place or mailed them back. So there's many, many, many people who are vote by mail, but they never get around to actually filling out their ballot and depositing it in the mail or getting to the polling place themselves, and therefore they are sitting here with a potential vote that's lost. And 27 states currently allow ballot gathering. There's different rules that different states have, and basically the states, California, I would say, has one of the more liberal laws, and so we'll get into that a little bit further here. Let me go to the next slide. So Section 3107, for those of you who are particularly interested in what the law says, I'm going to try to avoid too much legalese, but in this one situation, I'm going to read this for you. Election Code Section 3017 says, a vote-by-mail voter who is unable to return the ballot may designate another person to return the ballot to the elections official who issued the ballot to the precinct board at a polling place or vote center within the state, or to a vote-by-mail ballot drop-off location within the state. So basically what it's saying is if someone's a vote-by-mail voter, they can give their ballot they can fill it out, give their ballot to someone else, and that person can go drop it off at one of the authorized locations. Now, you'll note here where it says a vote-by-mail voter who is unable to return the ballot. Well, I looked at that because I wanted to determine whether or not there was any concern that I should express with regard to, what the definition of unable means. And I went and actually found some case law from the 80s that said, individuals who actually just had someone else take their ballot in, it does not violate the purposes behind the election code. And essentially what's happened is unable just simply could mean unwilling, or it's not something where you have to be disabled or out of state or anything like that. It's just simply an individual has the ability to determine for themselves whether they're going to go to the ballot box and deposit their vote, or they're going to just give it to someone else to deposit. Next slide, please. What are some of the concerns with ballot gathering? Now, you probably heard a lot after the last election with individuals, particularly Republicans, who were upset because the Democrat Party was very successful using this and changed a lot of elections from what would have been typical Republican-dominated seats to a slim majority where the Democrats won. And so there were a lot of arguments that came against this concept of ballot harvesting. One is voter harassment. So there's always that risk where you have an individual who is a gatherer who goes to an elderly couple's home and says, I will help you, let me help you fill out your voter form. I'll give you instructions on who to vote for, and maybe that those individuals are just, they feel harassed and they end up just doing what's asked of them simply because they want to get this person out of their face. There's unwelcome influence that can come. Someone who says, look, I just simply don't want to vote this year, so leave me alone. There's been circumstances where there were mishandling of ballots, where a ballot gatherer actually went, and this was a Republican individual who destroyed about 1,000 votes for Democrats because apparently somehow they were aware that when they gathered these votes that these individuals voted for a Democrat, and they did not turn the votes in like they were supposed to turn them in after they had gathered them. So there are issues like this where there's potential mishandling and problems like that anybody who would be involved with you in gathering votes, you would just want to try to make sure that they're people of good character. And if they're not, you probably don't want them to be involved in this at all. The last concern is the Johnson Amendment. What's that? That's the concern that most pastors have that says it's this rule established in, I believe it was 1955 by Johnson when he was in the Senate, and there was this bill that said 501c3 organizations cannot be partisan in their operations. And so I'll give you a further explanation on that and why that's really not going to be a problem for us. Next slide, please. As I said in 2000, I said 2016 before. It's actually 2018, where the Democratic Party used the ballot gathering to take control of the U.S. House of Representatives effectively from Republicans. And much of their success came in California. And in Orange County, for example, where there were solid Republican seats that had been Republican seats for years and years and years, they went in upon the polls closing. It appeared that the Republican candidates were ahead in many instances. And then turned out, after all of the ballots were turned in, that due to the ballot gathering that was so successful in California by Democrat operatives, they were able to change the seats so that the winner ended up being a Democrat. For example, in next slide, please. In California's 21st district, there you had a case between an election between David Valadao and T.J. Cox, and there the polls closed. And at the time, Valadao led Cox by 6,000 votes. And then the media called the race for the Republican candidate, for Valadao, thinking he's got 6,000 votes ahead. A large enough majority that the media felt they could call it. Well, the late ballots that were delivered by these various third-party groups delivered enough votes so that Cox ends up winning by 843 votes, just through the ballot gathering, effectively through the ballot gathering, and that was not uncommon in 2018 to see that. In fact, one of my lawyers, she was running for school board in the city of Murrieta, Netta Higuera, and she was ahead. I forget by how many votes, but she was significantly ahead at the close of the day, and it sure looked like she was going to win. And day after day after the election, more and more votes, these late votes were counted, and probably due to the ballot harvesting, she ended up losing by just a few seats. And so this is proven itself to be a real effective tool to be able to, for individuals or groups to get out and gather the votes to support the candidates and get them in before the end of the evening. Now, there's some criticism to this. Let's go to the next slide. House Speaker Paul Ryan, he was quoted. He said, quote, "California just defies logic to me. We were only down 26 seats the night of the election, and 3 seats later, we lost basically every contested California race. The selection system they have, I can't begin to understand what ballot harvesting is." And that was his quote. Now, I don't know if he comes from a state where they allow ballot harvesting or not, but the reality of it is this is the law in California. Numerous Republicans are opposed to ballot harvesting for privacy reasons, for concern about tampering with votes or things that, just like I said, this one situation where it was actually a Republican who did not turn in 1,000 votes, Democratic votes. So, there's legitimate concerns to these issues, but, under the circumstances, we are where we are, and this is the law of California. And, if we play by the rules, we can help ensure that there are no issues, no problems. Next slide, please. Orange County reported that individuals were dropping off 100 to 200 ballots at a time. And here's an opportunity for churches to be able to get involved and do the same thing. And I'm not here to tell you to encourage your participants to vote for Democrats or vote for Republicans. I'm simply encouraging you to get your congregation and individuals to get out and vote biblical values, to vote for the individuals that are going to vote in a way that would be consistent with our Judeo-Christian ethic that we try to promote. So let's go to the next slide. Here's some protections with regard to the legal guidelines. It's a criminal act to engage in fraud, bribery, intimidation, and tampering with or failing to deliver the ballot in a timely fashion. So it is the laws there. It exists. If someone engages in some improper conduct, well, they can be prosecuted. In Section 2 of that same Election Code 3017, it says the rule is the person designated, and that is the voter has the ability when they identify the individual that they authorize on the envelope itself for the ballot, and it says the person designated shall return the ballot in person or put the ballot in the mail no later than 3 days after receiving it from the voter, but before the close of polls on Election Day, whichever time period is shorter. So that's the rule that just simply authorizes the voter to designate an individual. Next slide. So a question is there any limit on how many ballots one person can return? Next slide. No, not at all. There are only 12 states that limit the number of ballots that an agent or designee can return, but not in California. California allows individuals to collect as many as they can. Next slide. If money is spent on ballot gathering, are there financial reporting requirements? Next. Not at all. And the reason is let's go to the next slide. What's happening here is this is nonpartisan participation. And where an individual, where an organization or an individual is not out there spending money for a particular candidate, you don't have those financial reporting requirements. And when a church participates, when you comply with the Johnson Amendment, you will not have any financial reporting requirements. Under the Johnson Amendment, 501c3 organizations are, listen closely, prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign. Now, the sentence doesn't end there. If it ended there, we would not be encouraging you to participate like we are. Rather, the Johnson Amendment continues on, and it says, any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for elective public office. It doesn't say any proposition or any legislation. It talks about being partisan and choosing one candidate over another. That's what is prohibited. Next slide. The IRS states that, and this comes from their website, Section 501c3 organizations are permitted to conduct certain voter registration activities, including the presentation of public forums and the publication of voter education guides, if they are carried out in a nonpartisan manner. Okay, so there's your support right there. Next slide. The IRS provides guidelines that says churches may participate in voter registration and get out the vote drives, distribute voter education guides, host candidates, doing public forums. I just heard Michael Bloomberg speaking at a church in, I think it was New York, and it was a large church, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's running for president now, and they invited him to come speak, and he gave his presentation, and to my knowledge, the pastor did not identify him by name and say, I'm endorsing him, just allowed him time to address the congregation. Next slide. So we addressed 1 through 3 already. The voter education activities intended to encourage people to participate in the electoral process in a nonpartisan manner are perfectly appropriate. And so from a legal perspective, you're good. And as a church, if you get involved in this and you do so in a nonpartisan manner, encourage your congregants to vote a biblical worldview, we will defend you. We will defend you for free. If the IRS comes after you, we as a legal organization are more than happy to step in on a pro bono basis, meaning for free, and defend you. There are even other organizations out there that we often team up with who would probably be willing to step in as well if we had more than 1 or 2 or 3 organizations. So let me get to the last slide, and this is just my encouragement to you. Dr. Martin Luther King, in a book, Strength to Love, in 1963, this is a quote that whenever I'm in front of pastors and we're talking about current cultural issues, I like to address this. He said, the church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. I fear that sometimes today we as a church have become somewhat irrelevant because we don't help our congregations address those important things sitting in front of us. That's it for me. Dran?
Echoes the Declaration of Independence's proclamation that all are endowed by their Creator with an inalienable right to life. Accordingly, we assert the sanctity of human life and affirm that an unborn child has a fundamental right to life which cannot be infringed. Contrast this with the only mention of inalienable right to the other party platform, a so-called inalienable right to vote. The conclusion of all this is this: one platform values votes over life. And that's all I wanted to share with you all this afternoon.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that, because personally, when I heard that, it changed my worldview about the parties and their platforms and whether we're going to honor God or not with our with who we associate with, as it says in Psalm 1, to stand in the way of the sinner or sit in the seat of the mocker. So anyway, that's your decision, but I thought I'd love to share that with you. And now we have come to this concludes the informational part of our